cannabis must, in some sense, thin the boundary between the conscious and unconscious mind, and I sort of imagine the unconscious as a system under hydraulic pressure. And if you smoke cannabis, the energy which would normally be channeled into dreams is instead manifest in the reveries of the cannabis intoxication. The reason that I've smoked it so assiduously over the years is very simply that it seems to dissolve a local and personalistic perspective. If I don't smoke cannabis, I worry about balancing my checkbook, the state of my immediate short-term career concerns. In other words, all the anxieties of the petty bourgeois pour in to claim my attention.
Ladies and gentlemen.
You having a nightmare? What if it's true?
Ladies and gentlemen.
Alan, it's a possibility, isn't it?
The very word secrecy is repugnant.
Secrets.
In a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweighed the dangers,
Constant, extreme danger,
which are cited to justify it. Even today, there is little value in opposing the threat of a closed society by imitating its arbitrary restrictions. Even today, there is little value in ensuring the survival of our nation if our traditions do not survive with it. And there is very grave danger,
extreme danger,
that an announced need for increased security.
What the hell is going on?
This is Conspiracy Queries Grand Garage.
Will be seized upon by those anxious to expand its meaning to the very limits of official censorship and concealment. That I do not intend to permit to the extent that it's in my control.
You're crazy.
And no officious, high or low, civilian or military, should interpret my words here tonight as an excuse to censor the news, to stifle dissent, to cover up our mistakes.
Isn't the Pentagon suspicious that all the buildings blow up?
Or to withhold from the press and the public
I think you're just looking at things for the first time.
the facts they deserve to know.
You've had your whole fucking life to think things over. What good's a few minutes more gonna do you now?
The facts they deserve to know. They deserve to know. Deserve to know. Deserve to know.
All right, it's Green Crush time. It's always a long wait for me to go from one week to the next. It's usually worth it. I'm raising my fist.
Facts they deserve to know.
That's the one. That's the one. Well, welcome. Thank you for coming back to the show. Okay. And where's that thing that always does that?
Hey.
How come that's happening?
Thanks
for
talking
with me
in
stereo. Shot it. Alan, come on. What are you doing? You're talking to yourself at the same time. It's a very weird day in Toronto, folks. We just had a blizzard. Okay, that's over now. And very strange indeed. But I'm so happy that we once again have one of our most popular guests. No offense to all the other guests. This guy makes the effort to show up live. So, that always adds a little magic to it. And we have Paul Hartmann is in the house today. Paul Hartmann is here. He's going to get us into trouble. He's getting me into trouble. He's teaching me things that I'm not supposed to know. And that's there we are. There's Paul there.
I was the kid that parents didn't want their kids to hang out with.
And now you're teaching me you're a bad influence. And when I say a bad influence, Paul, if it wasn't made clear last time, don't stop the show now and go back and listen to his previous appearance. But on top of all kinds of things, Paul is a master grower.
Uh-oh.
And I'm going to be learning this. Now, why would I be learning that when the Canadian government says only these large corporations are going to be allowed to grow anything, never mind like a master? And that's all part of what we are doing is learning how to take this power onto ourselves. Now, I did this when I had stage 4, irreparable, apparently. That's what they told me anyway. The doctors, the scientists, the folks that prescribe all of the drugs. And I'm constantly having conversations, that's a nice word for it, battles sometimes, intellectual back and forths online with people who always insist to always believe everything the doctor says anytime. And to not do that, you're probably insane. But I would rather be insane and healthy and alive as I am, rather than, and I'm using that mockingly, I'm not insane. But if you want to believe that, fine. At least you get to call me insane, rather than sane and dead.
Yeah. Yes, I would like to introduce you all to the ghost, Alan Park.
Yeah, I'm not really here right now.
He's not here. He's dead 3 years? You've been dead 3 years now, right?
Yeah, Christmas time 3 years ago, yeah.
Lord. Well, he doesn't smell.
I don't smell, no. I'm still, I've got some fungus, but I don't smell.
No, it doesn't smell.
It's something I'm trying to scrape. You ever have on the heel that it's too thick back there and you got to take a file to it? The back of your heel? It depends on the shoes you wear also.
True. Hobnail boots help for that.
Hobnail? What's that? What does that mean anyway? Hobnail boot.
Remember Frankenstein, the boots he wore had all the nails in the bottom of it, and back in those days they used nails to hold the leather on the boots, and the hobnail boot was a boot that Nazi stormtroopers wore. And so the sound of the march of the hobnail boot.
Oh, I see. Well, the hobnail boot, it's nothing to do with hobbit?
No.
Okay.
No, that's different. You use a stick to clean the hobbit out of the boot.
Okay. And this is, he means boot. I know he's Canadian, and some maybe boot, international listeners think he's referring to a boat right now, but he's referring to a boot. So I'm not saying a boot with a Canadian accent. I'm saying a boot and not a boat. That sounds like a boot.
I say it with a California Canadian accent, though.
Oh, yeah, you were from there. You spent a lot of time there. You cut your teeth there, right? As an adult, little kid and an adult.
I suppose I did. Well, yeah, I left Canada when I was 5 and went to California.
Well, we are going to get to a little bit of your story before we bring our other guest on the show today, who was not able to fly in. But Paul knows him very well. I met him on the phone recently, and thrilled to have him on because, as I have always, I'll say it, preached since maybe about a year into my turnaround from guaranteed death until now in this place, I always recommend and say to people, you have to take your own power, and you have to understand how cannabis can work and go down that road. And, of course, one of the major things to do with that is to learn how to grow it. So Paul's a master grower, and I haven't done this yet. I haven't really felt like I've had the time to get involved with that. Given the scope of what's been going on in my life and how I'm trying to help other people to get through the same maze I was able to get through. And I've never really had the space, but Paul is going to help me change all that. And so is our guest today, Scott Zeramby. He lives in California, And like my friend sitting across from me now, proud to call him, happy to call him a friend. They're both jailbirds.
Oh,
gee whiz.
Jail? Ouch.
Let's call it prison, incarceration. What? How much time did you do fully?
Prison?
Like, how long were you actually in there?
Oh, God, 3 years.
3 years, but a 5-year sentence? And then you got some good time.
You get almost half time or something like that.
That's why when they put you away for life.
But, yeah, mine thing got tangled up in INS holding afterwards, though. So, Scott's was a little different because he's an American.
Right. So he's still down there, and he gets to live there.
Yeah, but Scott's all expunged and pure now. He's a born-again non-felon.
How long is that? Well, we'll talk to him about that, I guess. So we do have Scott is also okay. So why is he here? He is in from Mendocino Agricultural Products, and we will find out whether this Canadian idiot sitting here right now is pronouncing it Mendocino or Mendocino. I don't know yet. He'll tell us. Anyway, he is going to help us. I had a 5-minute conversation with him on the weekend to prep me for this, and it turned into about a half an hour. And I could have well recorded this, and it would have been a great show on its own.
Scott is a legend.
He's a legend.
He is a true legend of cannabis in California.
Well, that's his story anyway.
Yeah.
Story, legend.
Yeah.
He is a legend in California, and we are looking forward to having him on shortly. But we have to parse some of the frustration that we call current news of the day right now. Last week, we did speak of this particular substance called, well, we didn't have a brand name yet at the time of the show, but there's this thing called K2, or spice, and it's a synthetic marijuana. Whatever that means. And it contains herbs and spices sprayed with a synthetic compound chemically similar to THC. So that's what would lure you in. You would be able to get this similar to THC, but of course similar and the same are not the same. And unfortunately, if you take this substance, a lot of people are having I think you have to use a heavier term than side effect when you're bleeding out of your eyes and ears. And that's not a good thing to do.
No,
so
bad sign.
All of this is all of this kind of activity that people get up to is a result and a reaction to the fact that the good stuff is illegal.
Listen, Visine won't work on that.
No, you can't stop the bleeding. You can stop red eye, but you can't stop bleeding. So if it weren't illegal, people wouldn't be struggling to cram things into themselves, such as K2 spice. So there were a lot of stories about this, and I chose, for the purposes of the show, I chose one of the stories. I mean, it was in Huffington, it was in CNN, etc. But I decided to read the one here for you from the Miami Herald, because how screwed up is Florida already? So we could do an Illinois story, we could do all kinds of states, but let's just take it from here. People's eyes are bleeding after this synthetic weed spice. Illinois officials say there's a fake form. That's what it is. It's a fake form of cannabis. The Illinois Department of Public Health issued a warning about this K2 or spice, or also called mind trip. That's a fascinating way to refer to your bleeding eyeballs. It turns out that since March 7th, a lot of people have been having problems. It's up to 22 people as of March 29th, according to the Chicago Tribune. A doctor in the emergency room there says that it's a new symptom for the drug. So many people erroneously believe this to be a safe alternative. The bleeding is not expected, she told the newspaper. Yeah, I don't think anybody taking it was hoping that would happen. So she's saying that in July last year, over 100 people overdosed on so-called synthetic pot in Pennsylvania County over the span of just 3 days. No one died, though. But I think if I'm bleeding out of my eyes, I might welcome that. And in 2015, around 700 people in Mississippi reported overdosing after taking the fake marijuana. Lancaster County District Attorney Craig Stedman said the spice, which has a chemical similar to THC, can make them violent. Now, is it really making them violent, or are they just pissed off that their eyes are bleeding? I mean, how do you discern that at that level?
You can imagine if your body is causing you to bleed out your eyes and ears, what's happening inside the blood-brain barrier.
Yeah.
Inflammation and bleeding will make you crazy, right?
Yeah. I think it's a bad thing to get into, folks. This is why I'm covering these stories, because I don't know if enough of this gets on the mainstream news, because if you follow the line of what's going on here, you'll realize that it's all, again, a sub-product of the illegality brought to us by our supposed elected leaders who are shepherding in what they like to call democracy, but it's not really that, because most people want free access to the plant. Most people want to grow it, and the folks that don't want their loved ones who do getting in trouble and disrupting the economy. So maybe we just need to legalize and understand, or I hate the word legalize, decriminalize. Just have it as a substance. Yeah. No one's getting in trouble for tomatoes and basil. Okay, so that's where this stuff needs to be, and it's not there yet. It's going to take a long time. Now, why am I so upset about this is because that, according to wisemindhealthybody.com, says here, synthetic marijuana, which we were just talking about, has been approved by the DEA for medicine, while the real thing remains illegal. Isn't that nice? The DEA has announced that the same manufacturer of the notorious fentanyl, all of whom should be in fucking prison right now, not like our friend here for cannabis growth, but, hard time. The amount of people that have died, the amount of people that are stuck on opioids, and the amount of willful ignorance coming down from our rulers about how dangerous marijuana is. So now they've got everybody hooked on fentanyl since the last 16, 18 years, has produced a synthetic marijuana they deem more medically valuable and safer than the real cannabis. Okay. This is the Drug Enforcement Agency, and I'm sure they had lots to do with shutting down your life and sticking you in a cage. The announcement was made a few weeks ago in the Federal Register that the drug Syndros, Syndros, a liquid form of synthetic THC, will now be classified as a Schedule II controlled substance, while they're leaving cannabis up at number 1, which means it has no medical value, so they say, which is odd when they're holding patents on what it can do for your health. Meanwhile,
for decades. Patents for decades.
Yeah, since before they banned it, right? Yeah. Meanwhile, organic marijuana continues to be listed up there as a Schedule 1, and this category is reserved for drugs that have no accepted medical use. So, yeah, this Syndros is hitting the market soon, everybody. Now, what did we just say about synthetic marijuana? You'll have to keep your eye on that before it starts hemorrhaging. It will be hitting the market soon. It's made by Insys Therapeutics, an Arizona-based pharmaceutical company that has been accused of using shady marketing practices to sell Subsys, or Subsys, a spray form of the extremely potent synthetic opioid fentanyl, which has been approved by the FDA for treatment of pain from cancer. That's terrible. A few top Insys executives, such as John Kapoor, phone this guy. Give him a hard time. It's Kapoor, the company's billionaire founder. Do you really think that big pharma has lots to do with preventing marijuana access? That's just a conspiracy theory. Again, he's a billionaire founder. These folks have been arrested and charged with bribing doctors. Science. Always believe science. And they're bribing doctors and defrauding insurance companies. Insys, once again, INSYS, and its former leaders are also facing several lawsuits from states and individuals for allegedly triggering America's opioid crisis. Well, somebody triggered it. I figure it's a billionaire pharmaceutical fella. And now they're trying to take over good old homegrown pot. So that's no good at all. And it continues to be something. Now, here's something I'd like to talk about. This is a little bit off topic, but not really. Ultimately, this is from the New York Times back in March. There's a big stubborn problem going on, and this is in the New York Times. It says, testy lying. Testy lying. That's not putting balls on the bed and leaving them there to stay flat. No. This is a thing where police lying persists, even amid an explosion of video evidence that has allowed the public to test officers' credibility. Now, how does this tie in with medical marijuana or recreational marijuana use? Use your imagination. Okay, Officer Nectar Martinez took the witness stand in a Bronx courtroom last year and swore to tell the truth, the whole truth, and there had been a shooting, and he testified, and he wanted to search a nearby apartment for evidence. A woman stood in the doorway carrying a laundry bag, and Officer Martinez says She set the bag down in the middle of the doorway, directly in his path. Quote, I picked it up to move it out of the way so we could get in. The laundry bag felt heavy, and when he put it down, he heard a clunk, a thud. What might be inside? Officer Martinez tapped the bag with his foot and felt something hard, he testified. He opened the bag, leading to the discovery of a Ruger 9mm handgun and the arrest of the woman. But a hallway surveillance camera captured the true story. There's no laundry bag at all. There's no gun in sight at all, as Officer Martinez and other investigators question the woman in the doorway and then stride into the apartment. Instead, they did find a gun, but little to link it to the woman, Kimberly Thomas. Still, had the camera not captured the hallway scene, Officer Martinez's testimony might have sent her to prison, and I will put it forward that these pesky cameras and recording devices the police have been having to wear for some time, and we have been having our personal phones being able to fill things for some time. There's a lot of lying going on. They came up with a word, test-a-lying. And I've been in court before, and I really loathe the fact that oftentimes a judge will just completely, without question, take the testimony of the officer as de facto the truth 100%. And the poor bugger on trial is not to be believed at any halfway point of a sentence or punctuation whatsoever. And while the officer says this, so you're obviously wrong, so off to jail you go. And I'm getting tired of that, but particularly when we consider that this is not just an American problem. If you live in a different country than America, you're also experiencing this, the odds would say. I'm sure it's happening here in Canada. We have a former police chief who is a G20 summit rights-abusing cop who was absolutely infringing and impinging the rights of several people who were rounded up illegally under a law that they said was a law but wasn't a law, illegally, taken to holding centers illegally, held there for hours with hardly any clothes or any comfort in cages in a film studio area of Toronto, fenced-in cages while they waited sometimes for a day or two or three, and there have been a bevy of lawsuits subsequently from the people who were able to find legal recompense for this massive, egregious series of test-lying, and their lives got fucked up. Now, where is this guy now? Oh, he is the major architect of Canada's new police-friendly and police-centered cannabis legalization. Your government is not your friend, okay? Your government is not your friend at all. And this officer, his name is Bill Blair. He's, well, I'll say it, he's a rather unfortunate-looking individual, and you can tell by his nose and the design of his face, and certainly by what he says, that he is definitely deep into the sauce all the time. So while you sit there and tell people who use cannabis that they're criminals if they don't use it in a proper way according to you or whatsoever, you have no purchase whatsoever on credibility, sir. Bill Blair, love to have you in the studio sometime, or any kind of naysayer to these proclamations, but of course he won't do that. He would be held to account. I would bring data. He wouldn't know what to say. I would easily strip away, not just myself, just anybody doing the research, strip away the faux science that he has clung to draft a series of laws, and I really resent the fact that with so many people around the world, such as Vera Toomey, who has been fighting the Irish government and has eventually won, wrestled that behemoth to the ground. Now the Irish government, not only, they will have to go to Netherlands to get her to get medication for their little daughter. They will have to do that, but it's covered now under the Irish healthcare system, so anybody experiencing that kind of positivity in Ireland, you have to hand that to Vera Toomey. Good for her. She had an emotionally powerful video where the news finally came through after fighting and risking incarceration and watching her little daughter suffer from Dravet syndrome, multiple seizures all the time. She has now the right to do this. There is scientific evidence, and I will not hear anybody in officialdom or anywhere else telling us that this is a harmful substance. Yes, it can be harmful if used improperly. So can chainsaws And so can power boxes where you put lines in to facilitate electricity use in your house. You don't just say, "Oh, electricity. Oh my God, you could get a shock from that and die. It could shut down your..." Yeah, it can do that. But they constantly harp on the negative properties of just about anything. And they won't bring forward the positive properties. Now, why go to the cops and say, "Okay, when we legalize it, how are we going to do this?" Sure, consult them a little bit, but why do they have to be number one? Why does a police chief who's a rights abuser allow himself and is allowed and is not recused from being the number one architect of these rules? How is that the case? Why don't they talk to folks that have used this substance? Myself, my guest here, Paul, who has also tackled prostate cancer and flattened that with the great help of the wonderful Dr. Sam Malachi. Okay, we're not just one guy here. These folks are all over the world. So don't tell me you've studied things and you've decided to go about it a certain way, because not only are the cops tested lying, so are the politicians who pay their ticket. Full stop, here it is. If we actually decriminalize cannabis and you crunch the numbers and you look at the spreadsheets of who gets paid how much for how many man hours in the police department, all of a sudden we're going to have to let a lot of fellas go. We won't really need them on board anymore, and that's been the problem. And with the police unions, and they've been wrestling control. They've succumbed to the public pressure of, they knew that was coming, and now they're setting up the game for themselves in such a way. So you're a cop, you're suspect to be tested lying. Same with anybody that's preventing access to, now it's just almost boring how demonstrably fantastic this stuff is.
I think the real problem too is that they're spinning a lot of false webs of knowledge about how it's going to be when it's legal, because what they're projecting isn't going to happen. There isn't going to be this massive increase in use. Maybe 2-3%. That's what has happened everywhere else where it's been legalized.
And some dips in usage
and then
as well.
It falls off afterwards, right?
There will be the people who live by the letter of the law, and they will be curious, but they never touch it. Yep. And then it'll be legal and say, well, I'm going to try that stuff, and they will. I mean,
the people who are using it today are the same people that are going to be using it the day after legalization. Right. And they already know where they're getting their stuff.
Right.
They already have been getting it there for decades.
Yeah.
And they're not going to change to something that isn't recognized in their peer group as being appropriate.
Hashtag ban government weed. Boycott it. Absolutely. All right, moving on to a different story. This is fascinating. It turns out from more research, this is online. You should look this stuff up, folks. I'm giving you the places where I'm finding this stuff, and I'm not reading the whole story because I can't do a 10-hour show. But I'd like to tell you about this particular segment here that is called
Welcome to the Future.
Yeah, so welcome to the future. It turns out that the future offers some really great, fantastic news. Check this out. This is in futurism.com. This marijuana compound, a compound they call it, removes. Is that a difficult word to understand? Removes? That's pretty straight up.
I think so.
Toxic Alzheimer's protein from the brain. And who doesn't have a family member or know somebody that has suffered from toxic Alzheimer's protein? This is the thing that makes you forget everything.
Went from Alzheimer's.
Well, God rest his soul. There's another one. I know so many people. My ex-wife's mother, same thing. Her mother, same thing. So let me read you this. Scientists have new evidence that suggests a particular compound inhibits the formation of amyloid plaques by blocking the enzyme in the brain that produces them. Neurodegenerative diseases, that's a mouthful for me, I'm not quite warmed up yet. Neurodegenerative diseases such as Alzheimer's are caused by the poor formation of those proteins in the brain. An active compound in marijuana has been found to promote the removal of toxic clumps of amyloid beta protein in the brain, thought to kickstart the progression of Alzheimer's. The finding supports the results of previous studies that have found evidence of the protective effects of cannabinoids And what is this particular substance that's helping us out with our Alzheimer's? Well, it's called THC. THC, folks. Yeah, I left that part out of here. You would have learned that earlier if you read the article on your own. It says, although other studies have offered evidence that cannabinoids might be neuroprotective against the symptoms of Alzheimer's, we believe our study is the first to demonstrate that cannabinoids affect both inflammation and the amyloid, which is a huge factor in many diseases, inflammation and amyloid beta accumulation in nerve cells. So this substance that we're told ruins your brain, right? If you take it, it's going to mess with your mind. It actually has not only not do that, but it reverses a normal quote-unquote condition where that does happen called Alzheimer's disease. So for all of you Puritans and all of you police and all of you anybodies and all of you medical folks that have designs on keeping this stuff under wraps, here's another horrible thing you're doing. Suppressing the knowledge that Alzheimer's disease can be flattened with THC. So let's just get off the only CBD train, okay? I love CBDs. I also take them. They're great. I am not knocking CBDs. I am not doing that. I am saying it's a whole plant package. That's what you need to get. Don't shun the THC if you're afraid of getting high and you're not sure what that is. Maybe you've got some psychological introspection you need to do, or maybe speak about that with some practiced therapist, what have you. But don't shun THC because it's bad for you. I know people that have cancer, and they say, is there any way I can just do the CBD thing and not the high part because I really don't want to. No one says that about chemo.
What a hype about THC,
yeah,
isn't it? Jesus.
It's unbelievable. No one says, yeah, I'll do the chemo, but can you take out the compound that makes me barf? Is that okay? Nobody says that.
Dr. Sam says you got to have at least 5% THC in it to get the entourage effect, which gives you a whole broad spectrum of relief from all kinds of things. And truly what you want is cannabis that has a spectrum of cannabinoids balanced across it.
Coming from the whole plant.
Coming from the whole plant.
Right.
That's what FECO extracts are all about, full extract cannabis oil. It's about using all parts of the plant when you do the extract.
Well, if you're not familiar with THC, that does provide the high, what you can gear up so that it doesn't get you too high. It has natural pain-relieving properties. It's an effective treatment for the symptoms of everything from HIV and chemotherapy to chronic pain, post-traumatic stress disorder. Very important, especially if we're going to keep on sending guys into different countries and invading them. Post-traumatic stress disorder and stroke. In fact, THC appears to be such an amazing medical agent. Researchers are working on breeding genetically modified yeast that can produce it way more efficiently. So let's see where that goes. The compound works by passing from the lungs to the bloodstream, where it attaches to two types of receptors. Our old friends, the cannabinoid receptors CB1 and CB2, found on cell surfaces all over the body. I'm sorry, officer, what was this illegal substance I'm having here? Oh, it's food.
Sorry, my body's making cannabinoids. Could you call me back later?
Don't arrest me for doing something on my own that happens with a scientific ability to actually create that stuff on its own.
Yeah, don't let any of that DMT slip out of that place where it's being made in your brain.
That's another one. DMT. You also make DMT. It's incredible. So that is something you want to look up in the future, from the future. And while all of that is going on, thanks to High Times News, we also know that about a month ago, the Health Secretary, Alex Azar, denies the existence of medical marijuana.
Well, let's deny his existence.
Look at this
and
fella.
move on to California. Fuck these guys.
This is why I always wear a tie, because he's obviously telling the truth. He's got the tie
That's
on.
right. And we are subscribing to the Allen Park theorem on ties. Everybody listens to people who wear ties, hence Allen is wearing a tie.
Got my tie.
And a bow tie guarantees that you're probably going to die by the person's hands who's wearing it.
Well, yours
because
has-
people with bow ties are fucked up.
You have a leaf on there, though, so I'm giving you credence. During a press conference on opioids at an Ohio inpatient facility that treats newborns suffering from prenatal drug exposure, U.S. Health and Human Services Secretary, Alex Azar said there really is no such thing as medical marijuana. Fucking liar, right there. The statement came on the heels of questions about the viability of medical cannabis as an alternative to opioid painkillers, of which there is substantial data. So while Ohio is preparing to launch its legal medical cannabis program, the National Federal Health Secretary, Alex Azar, denies the existence of said particular dosage. I guess he doesn't believe it. Other countries have a better idea what to do with it. We've got legalized weed in Uruguay. I think you and I have to get on down to South America.
Oh, we'll get there.
You can't. You got to fly right over top of the states.
Right over.
And they still get upset about folks in their airspace for some uptight reason. But Paul has to go down to South America. Pharmacies are dispensaries down there. The country of 3.5 million allows cannabis to be sold at select pharmacies without a prescription, as the country does not offer a separate system for medical marijuana users. Citizens of Uruguay, not tourists, can purchase up to 40 grams per month at the pharmacies. And
For
it's
a
about
couple of bucks a gram.
well, $2.50. $2.50 a gram, actually.
Candidate's coming.
So shit your pants, Justin, because what's going to happen is as people become master growers, and I consider myself to be lining up to be a novice in this field, but I will be doing this. The more people do this and the more aware they are of how it works, they will be able to create their own. Also, things are going to get smoother in the greenhouses now that they're not illegal, and folks are going to understand.
Yes, and remember, you too can go to Ganja Tech. You just sign up online.
That's it. That's it. And what are they going to do, though, seriously, when folks are able to actually create viable, wonderful medicine of this nature for $2, $3, $4 a gram? What are they going to do?
It's going to be exactly what's happened in California and Oregon in the last 2 years. I mean, we've watched, and we'll learn more about this when we talk to Scott, but the cannabis market there has just crashed, right? I mean, it's below $50 an ounce in Oregon and California for the best outdoor organic cannabis you can get on the planet.
It's amazing.
Yeah, so it's this idea that people are going to be paying $10 a gram for your federally produced cannabis by these companies that have dumped hundreds of millions of dollars into huge facilities that are unsustainable in an international market where it's all grown outside under sun.
Yeah.
Oops,
And
sorry.
and what else are they going to
do? Sorry about your money. Sorry.
What are they going to do then? It's going to be even worse and more funny and hilarious when, okay, they set the price, the newbies try it, we get into the new paradigm of quote-unquote legalization, decriminalization. What's going to happen soon after that when this price drops to such a point?
Cannabis is a commodity. It's going to be like coffee or orange juice. There'll be a market that buys it all up. Growers come to these places. They turn it over to the brokerage. The brokerage grades it and sells it off internationally. That's what it's going to end up.
That's how it's going to go.
And the price is, it's going to be like going to the flower market in Amsterdam, right? You know, it's going to be one of those deals. And it's not going to be treated any different than any other commodity in a decade.
Well, unfortunately, LeafScience.com says drug maker will soon hold a patent on THC CBD as cancer cures. You know, all that shit they told us it couldn't happen.
Yeah.
We were doing it on our own.
The cure
we were
that
bad
doesn't
guys.
exist, yes.
Yeah, and now they're going to make money on it, and now all of a sudden it's all great.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. It says here GW Pharmaceuticals in England that specializes in cannabis-based pharma has received early approval on a patent covering the use of the chemicals for treating brain cancer.
And this will be in the courts, challenged for decades, because you can't patent something like this that only comes naturally from a plant.
It's disgusting.
Their little variation of it they can patent, but they're not going to be able to stop anybody else from producing it.
That's not fair. It's not reasonable, and it's certainly a bit of a drag for anybody that might be involved in the cultivation for profit right now of cannabis. And so we do have someone like that about to give us a call. Our guest, Scott Zeramby, is probably picking up his phone right now, and
Scott Zeramby.
He's probably going to tell us all about it. I hope he gets on here soon.
Scott and I met in Laguna Beach, California, which is probably one of the most beautiful places on the planet.
I've never been.
Just a bunch of private beaches chained together in a very small community of wealthy Orange County Republicans for the most part.
Orange County Republicans.
Yeah.
Well, let's see where Scott is now. We're kind of waiting for him to give us a call. He's in California. He's got the green light to call in. It was easier to do it this way than otherwise. And so coming up next is Scott.
Because he's calling from California.
Oh yeah, that was the calling in music right there. I'm just hoping he's going to give us a ding. Now, 2 missed calls. Wow, there it is. Call in, man. Oh, we've got a snowstorm going here. Come on, you're going to want to see this, Scott. We got another snowstorm out here in Toronto, Ontario, and here we go. Let's have him call in. Where is this? Phone call. I know he's left a message, it seems, but it didn't actually ring, so that's bizarre. This is the live show tech. Now, it's 3 missed calls. Now, how is that happening? Okay, Scott, I don't know what's going on, but try us again.
Can you call him back?
I cannot do that. I cannot do that. We went through all this earlier. I'm going to do it if he doesn't get through, too. Scott, are you listening? Scott is there. Yeah, I know. It's a bit nuts. Okay, so we're having some tech issues. That's the trouble with live shows, folks. There he is. Fantastic. Scott, are you there, Scott? We weren't able to get in touch with you right away. How's it going?
I'm here. Phone. You invite me to the party, but you don't answer your phone. What's up with that?
I'm not sure what's up with that, but you're here now. That's the important thing. I'm going to turn you up a little bit. And
that is.
Good to have you here, Scott.
Okay, you pirates. I'm gonna get right to the crux of things with how did you two meet each other? So we already have Paul on as a guest, as a grower. He's done time for it. Scott also spent time in the Crowbar Motel. Tell us all about it. How did you get into the game, and then how did you get arrested?
Well, heck, like I said to Paul before we reconnected here, we should really stick to things that the statute of limitations has run out on.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Give you a brief overview. We had a mutual friend years ago who knew us both, and both had this predilection for testing boundaries and smoking big fat joints. And he thought we should meet, so we did, and we became fast friends. I was just fascinated by Paul and his, boundless wisdom, and his, his capacity to roll the biggest joints I've ever seen.
Thank you. I'm so.
Uno más gasolino, por favor.
Uno más gasolino, por favor. Sí.
That's amazing. So he rolled big joints. How many papers would you use?
Oh, sometimes 2, but
all of them.
Yeah, all of them.
I think all of them.
Scott lived about 4 blocks from me, and he was the first computer kind of geek person I ever met, because he was selling computers and
when was that? When were you selling computers, Scott?
Oh, that was in the early '80s, probably 8. That was back when Apple, the Lisa to the Macintosh.
Oh, right.
That dates me a little bit. So yeah, that was a megabyte. A megabyte of RAM was like $1,600.
A phone doesn't even come close to that.
$200. That's incredible. Wow. So you partook on a recreational basis, just like a lot of people do. Is that it?
Yeah, and there was a lot of music involved. Like Scott and I would listen to music, and a band that I was managing, the bass player lived at Scott's, right?
Oh, okay. What band was that? Can we say?
A band called Nightfall, who these guys were destined to be the next White Lion or something like that. But they were such a bunch of knuckleheads.
So you were managing them,
Yes.
and we don't have them now. So
I was managing hair bands.
No,
Right
but
now
the
I'm trying to
lead
manage the
singer
hair
is
lines,
in a
but
band
then,
called
yeah,
Steel Panther
hang,
now.
hang on a sec, Scott. Hang on. Go ahead. What's the name of the band again? Sorry.
Steel Panther.
Steel Panther. Oh man, that's the best.
Have you seen any of that, Scott?
I have. I've recently actually reconnected with Ralph.
And so these guys all got high. Is that it?
Well, they were all kind of stupid, basically, but talented. I got to the point where I decided musicians were mentally retarded by choice.
Oh.
And these guys were the classic example of it.
And we're off the air.
Yeah.
Anyway, so. Oh, well.
You know, just to give a little context to this, do you remember in the studio, at Paul Warroff's studio in Vista, when they were doing their demo, and they were playing the game Dirt Mouse?
Dirt Mouse. That sounds potentially horrible.
Dirt Mouse.
What goes on there?
I kind of forgotten the story, but it's making some creepy vibrations up my back.
And the other guy throws a dirt clod in it.
Throw a dirt clod in a fella's mouth. Dirt mouth. I thought you said
Right.
dirt mouse. It's
So what
dirt
happens
mouth.
if you miss? What happens if you miss?
Yeah, well, it goes
Well,
in
you
their
hit 'em in the
face.
face with the dirt clod. You're right. But this, I watched this game go on for hours. They were having fun.
These guys were knuckleheads anyways. But so Scott and I met that way. But one of the pivotal points in Scott's and mine's relationship to cannabis was he came up with this strain called hash plant number 6.
Oh, that sounds good.
And this plant made me a legend in Hollywood.
Is that right?
This was the plant that he got this from a friend of his who was growing it in a closet. And it had come from the Sacred Sativa Seed Club in Amsterdam.
Wow.
And they had gotten bought up by the Sensi Seed Bank, and the strain kind of disappeared. And we got it as a cutting. And Scott gave it to me. And we had that for 15 years as just a cutting. Was that it, Scott?
Oh, God, yeah. Even longer. I'm Mendocino. I probably had it for 22 years or something.
Wow.
That's unbelievable, Scott. Give us a brief rundown on your tech. You live in a bizarre area, and there's only satellite, and it's crackling, and it's not always controllable, and you can't always be online, and your phone doesn't always work. Is that right?
Well, that's the reason why a soup can and a string right now, Alan. Yeah, that's it's much more reliable and better fidelity.
Well, I hope it's not Campbell's.
But yeah, we're in the west coast of California and the north. We're probably as far west as you can get on the continent right here in Mendocino. But we're the forgotten land, proud but forgotten.
They don't care about you too much tech-wise. They haven't set up a lot of lovely towers, and maybe you're going to be in the 5G pool. Who knows? But okay, so let's move along to the area of time where both of you guys, started down your path towards incarceration, and of course leave out anything that the statute of limitations would be a problem for you. Let's hear a bit about that.
Gee.
Well, the timeline kind of goes like this. We were buddies. We were smoking buddies, and like you said, I had a little bit of a tech background. So he was launching helping to launch the Club Post Nuclear. If that doesn't ring a bell for you.
What's it called again? Sorry.
And
Club Post Nuclear.
Oh. Yes.
And I was the manager of the club, and it was a $3 million nightclub in Laguna Beach.
Oh, wow.
Owned by this Chinese guy who owned a bunch of hospitals. But he had the Morpheus Design Studio in New York design the place.
Oh, okay.
And it was spectacular. I mean, it was had a floating aluminum dance floor. And
wow.
And
I don't even know what that means.
Well, it was floating on rubber.
Oh, I see.
John Mayer sound system too.
I'm sorry. Let's go again, Scott.
Oh, it didn't have it had the sound system too, right? It had the top of the line, most amazing sound system I'd ever heard.
Oh, wow.
Meyer sound system.
Nice.
Same thing the Grateful Dead and Pavarotti used, right?
Wow.
Sting.
I didn't know that Pavarotti toured with the Grateful Dead, but I'm sorry I missed
Same
that.
sound system.
Oh, I see. Okay. I would have enjoyed that.
Would have been
mix.
something.
Yeah.
Pavarotti and the Dead.
Yeah. Put it together. See the ideas you come up with. So then you're at this sound system, fantastic, wonderful club, right, with a floating dance floor. And that's when you started to get into the ideas of growing and cultivating?
Well, no, we were that idea. Actually, that when I was about 12 years old, my mom came into my bedroom one night and said, "What is that glow coming from your desk?" And of course, I didn't notice the glow coming from my desk. What glow? What desk glow? What are you talking about, Mom? You got to leave now. And she pulled the drawer open, and there were 6 little plants in there. And that was the beginning for me. Paul and I, when we met, that was like, dynamite meets the match. It was that I realized that for years, not necessarily Paul and I, but independently, messing around for years. But when we met, I think there was a synergy that we were both just fascinated with the plants. We were fascinated with people that were fascinated with the plants, and frankly, it was inevitable. It just took a few years for us to meet.
It was a cultural thing too, because we both liked the Grateful Dead, and so we would go to those kind of events together, and we had our extended family. And when Scott got in trouble, I remember taking him up to Mendocino.
Right.
And introducing him to some friends of mine up there, because it was clear that Scott had to get out of Orange County. Like, it was like...
That must be bizarre.
Because Laguna Beach was such a small place that once the cops knew about you, you were fucked, basically, right? And so I remember taking him up there, and he bought his first piece of land. And...
How large a chunk was that?
Well, you got a 40-acre piece up in Comchi, didn't you?
I was 10. It was 10 acres.
10.
10 acres with, yeah, it was, Clayton Roberts said to say hello. I just ran into him from the other day.
Clayton, what a wonderful
human. He's actually
human.
watching this podcast right now.
Oh, hey, Clayton, how are you? Listen, I'm trying to go in sort of consecutive order to keep things together, but we do have a listener right now with a question. From Papa G, and I'm just going to jump right into it. It's a cultivational-based question, so we're kind of skipping forward in time to your current state of knowledge as opposed to your long-haired Eagles, Grateful Dead listening music days. This is from Papa G Grows. Papa G Grows. He's on YouTube. He says, "Can you at germination?" And you probably have to explain what that might be to the non-growers, because let's also remember that this show is designed to help people understand how to not know anything about this and get to the place where they can actually grow. So we'll go back in time a little bit and get to that. But this guy says, "Can you at germination influence the plant's sex using photoperiod? It's said that long days, 20 hours or so, will yield males, and greater than 14 hours will yield, is that what it means? Less than 14 hours will yield females. Second from the audience is, well, we'll get to that in a minute. So let's just say that, can you at germination influence the plant's sex using photoperiod if you go a certain amount of hours? Is that possible?
No.
Okay.
That's genetic predisposition. You can't really influence the sex of the plant without using some pretty harsh chemicals that can suppress the females. But virtually all cannabis is female dominant. It only takes to pollinate billions of females.
Right. And the male plants.
Cannabis.
Oh shoot, we've lost him. All right, I thought that might happen. I'm going to give him a call back, but
I'll address that.
Yeah,
question.
Paul, you pick that up.
Yeah. A seed has a genetic predisposition, and based on stresses in the environment, could possibly, under negative circumstances, alter its genetics or slip into a hermaphroditic state because of environmental stresses. But normally a plant does not change its sexual orientation unless it's stressed. And it's basically a strategy for seed survival. The whole motivation of the plant is to make seed, right?
Right. That's amazing. So you're back with us
Although
now.
I do have, I have a female plant right now, and we're talking about it, and we're all fine with that. But it's just the way it works.
Okay, another quick one from the audience. Grow with live soil and Korean natural farming for that special love effect. Do you know what that means? Korean-style natural farming using live soil. Isn't all soil live? Isn't that the idea?
Not all soil is live.
Should be, though.
A lot of it's been killed by chemicals, right? So that's what Scott specializes in, is making live soil. Right?
Okay.
Talk about that, Scotty.
Let's hear about live soil then, because this is great stuff. I have not heard of this.
The Korean natural farming method is it's the one straw revolution. So it's there's a wonderful philosophy, which essentially is that plants want to live, and mostly humans get in the way of that desire. So do less, get more. And plants' genetic expression, their full genetic potential will be expressed if a human can stay out of the way.
I see. This is incredible. And you have to keep on top of so many things such as this when you're growing, especially a large crop, right? If you have mites or some kind of problem, you have to.
Well, here's the thing with organic: when you're outside growing, mites are never a problem. I mean that is a problem of indoor growing, because you got to look at plants have an open immune system, right? Our immune system is closed because it's confined by skin.
Inside the body, okay, right.
Their immune system is outside of them. So everything in the environment affects how they react to the environment. Where their real health comes from is the biodiversity in the soil and the health of the soil. That is their functional immune system. Everything else is attacking it, right?
Wow.
So when you have a healthy soil like Scott manufactures, the plant has all the benefits of a healthy immune system right out the gate. Right?
Okay.
And when you're outside, you're not concentrating that immune system. That is, you've created an enclosed system for something that lives in an open system, right?
Right.
So when you enclose it, you concentrate all those problems into a confined area.
Okay. And so not the boll weevil or something like that outdoors?
It could be anything. And the thing that causes the greatest problem there is lack of diversity in what you're growing. Whenever you monocrop something and an insect decides that it likes that, that's when you have a big problem. And they end up using pesticides.
So take us through, you guys, and we'll sort of lean heavier on Paul because he's here. And we're having this bizarre satellite kind of sound happening in the background. But when you, Scott, how do I say this? I don't know how to grow. So basically, if you can put it into a WikiHow and understand and get it across, like what are the essentials that people, because I've always said people should grow their own, and regardless of any kind of governmental limit or what have you. You have one plant, you have 10 plants, whatever you're going to do, you need to take the same care with what you're doing, I suppose. So what is the best way to do it? I mean, you just take a plant, take the soil and stick a seed into it and water it, and that's it? I mean, there's a lot of other things that folks need to know, correct?
Well, that's in all simplicity, that's it right there. You take a plant, you take a seed, you put it in the ground, and the plant grows. I got some pictures that I think I sent over yesterday of plants growing out of my compost pile. The biggest plant that I grew last year, I never want to grow. If you're going to try to do it it's far easier to do it in nature than it is to do it out of nature, and that's where I think humans run into problems. Is we've taken the plant and we've kind of taken it out of its nature, and we are trying to recreate a natural environment. Well, some of us are. Some of us are trying to create an absolutely hyper-sterile environment. When you look at more of the indoor grows. You're looking more of like a pharmaceutical product rather than a plant or a food. Yeah, you got to really pay attention to staying within the comfort zone of the plant, and then the plant's going to do what the plant should do. But kind of running back to when we were talking about that soil biological diversity, in a tablespoon of soil, there's about 1 billion different microorganisms. And many of those microorganisms are responsible for what we call drugs today. A lot of antibiotics were actually isolated from soil, naturally occurring soil biology. And they take those into the lab, they grow them out under sterile conditions, and then they react them with things like nitric acid, and they make things like tetracycline. So we are not creating nature. We're really living with it and trying to harness some of that energy. And to even go back another giant step, something that you guys were talking about, not the hobnail boot. I'm trying to, just so people don't get flustered by my accent. What you guys were talking about earlier, we're talking about this really interesting, I would call it the path to wisdom. And we have this information, we have knowledge, and then we have wisdom. And I think humans get stuck with information, which is the internet, is what's really, the internet provides lots of information. And then you take the information and you put it to work for you. And through a little bit of trial and error, you get knowledge. And then once that knowledge is perfected, you have wisdom. But if you get stuck in any of those first steps, it's a kind of a phase-locked loop where you never really break out. And you got to kind of open your mind and allow wisdom to occur. Just like anything, the harder you try, the worse it is.
Right.
So, experiential knowledge leads to wisdom.
Absolutely.
Correct. Absolutely.
Like when you plant your first one, and you're going to screw it up, right? There's going to be a problem, and you'll go, "Oh, next time I'll have to compensate vis-a-vis this."
There's always going to be errors in the process, and one of the things that I always stress to people is every plant you learn how to grow teaches you something. Or a mushroom or whatever it is, right? And I'm not just talking about kinds of cannabis. I'm talking about vegetables and herbs and lettuce and squashes. All these things give us a degree of knowledge that we wouldn't normally get going to a supermarket, right? So we get this emotional bond to our food, to our medicines, to all these kind of things, and gaining that knowledge and participating in it with plants is one of the greatest spiritual things we can do for ourselves, because it gives us a connection to our environment that is outside the brain. It's not an intellectual thing, it's a physical, tactile thing. That action of growing a seed. I'll give you a classic example. When I first came back to Ontario, I ran a place called Puck's Farm. Puck's Farm. Okay. And it was a petting zoo farm for school kids from Toronto.
Okay.
In Schaumburg, right?
Yeah.
And so, 4 school buses full of kids would show up at this place every day all spring long. And they would get to plant a garden.
Yeah,
right?
nice.
And it was like, these kids didn't know where an egg came from. When they saw a chicken and you showed them a chicken and that an egg came from it, they were like, "Fuck you, get out of here. You're so that's bullshit," right?
Yeah.
And every kid got to milk the cow kind of thing and all that stuff, right? It's the same thing with cannabis and all these things. You create a spiritual bond with this plant, and it's taking you on an educational journey, right?
Yeah.
And to grow good cannabis, it's about interpreting the needs and desires of that plant.
Well, are there countermeasures? Like I'll give you the vegetable version of this that I know, because I'm a very rudimentary grower. I started to do this a couple of years ago. And the first batch in these boxes near my place, I grew things, and then someone told me the next year everything I was growing was legitimate, tomatoes and what have you. And someone told me that the reason I was having trouble with some of those is that because the proximity of where you had one kind of plant versus another kind of plant, and if you just put that in a different box or keep them away from each other, and then other plants are complementary, like your basil with your tomatoes is a great idea.
Yeah,
but
companion planting.
Companion planting. Okay, so that's a fascinating study because they're all drawing from the earth the same substance if you put in the same
It goes
fill.
even beyond that. Rudolf Steiner, who is considered the father of organic farming, created something called biodynamic agriculture, which takes into account all the astrological movements.
You're kidding.
And how they affect plants, because plants and insects are governed by the astrological movements of planetary bodies, right? And that is the other level of organic. Like guys who are organic, and then there's guys who are biodynamic.
Right.
And
it's like vegans that only eat vegetables. There's that kind of vegan, and then there's the other kind of vegan that won't even buy vegetables from a place that's also selling meat. So there's these levels of.
There are vegan pot people too that won't smoke pot that has been grown with an animal product.
Such as, what would be the animal product? Manure?
Manures, blood meal, bone meal, fish.
Wow. Yeah. I know some vegans that won't watch a movie. They didn't used to anyway, because the final product is on a celluloid, from
gelatin.
Yeah, gelatin. I can't watch movies. Some people really take it to the limit. Another Eagles reference.
And human nature is a funny thing, and human beings are funny things. Human beings get confused and think that they're human doings, and a whole lot of success is created by doing less and being more.
Yeah, that's right. So you have a bit of a Spartan mindset when you're growing. I mean, tell us about when you have a lot of plants, what's the idea? Here's some simple questions, and I know they're simple because I don't know. I have no idea. What's the best distance between plants if you're going to grow a row of them? Are they right beside each other, or you have to?
Depends on the plant.
Depends on the
how
kind
much
of
space you have and what you're doing entirely. I mean, it's. There was what they call the law of diminishing return.
Right.
Right. So you plant them too close and too far apart, and at one point you don't get any more yield by making them further apart. You're not efficiently using your space.
Space, right?
So
could have more plants in there, but too close together, maybe that's a problem as well.
It's also a plant that evolved in it's a colonizing plant. Right, by the nature of how it grows, it produces a phenomenal amount of seed, and it'll drop 250 seeds a square foot if it grew in its normal environment. Right, so it's different in that sense than a lot of plants, but it has what's known as a plant field psychology of its own. So what it does to survive and guarantee its proliferation.
Wow, that's incredible. So. Let's get back to. I wanted to touch on something we talked about the other day, Scott, if you will. Not that I ever planned to do this, but exactly how did you smoke a joint in prison?
Oh, wow!
That's a possibility, or I mean, I've seen some. I saw the movie The Green Mile, but that's not the green they were talking about.
I smoked one on my 50th birthday in there.
How did you do that? Were you breathe it into your sleeve, or how do you get away with that?
Well, first of all, that it came in somebody's rectum.
Oh my goodness!
So you're like, oh, okay, all right. So it's very expensive, and it was more like a cigarette paper rolled in itself.
So this is once again something that would keep the vegans away, right?
Yeah,
because it's got animal product in it.
So we just went out on the yard where there was no people around, and we sucked the thing down in about 3.5 seconds.
Wow, amazing!
That was it.
That's incredible. I personally
wrecked him and nearly killed him.
I was high for a week.
That's incredible. And did you get paranoid? I mean, sometimes people get paranoid. You're in jail smoking.
No, we were already in prison.
Yeah.
Right. I wasn't afraid of getting out.
But glass bongs, etc. You're not going to find that, right? You just have to get some paper.
No.
Did you use toilet paper or something to roll it, or
no,
are those
we had,
also?
I was
paper?
in there just at the end of when they finally stopped cigarette smoking in prison.
In prison, that must have been tough.
Oh, it was tough on the cigarette smokers. I'll tell you,
Yeah.
some grumpy people for a while.
That's unreal.
And I think Scott, I was in after you were out for a long time, huh, Scott?
Yeah, and just to tie Paul and I together a little closer, the first joint that I smoked in prison proper, I smoked a few in jail. So when I got to prison, I said to myself, I am going to get out of this place. I'm not going to get in any trouble while I'm here. Famous last words.
Sure.
But anyway, all the affirmations that you say to yourself when you're going into a new scary place. And I met somebody in the law library who Paul knew back in the very early 70s.
Oh, wow.
Yes, I've heard that. And he and I became friends through my having to defend my personal property. We talk about Tesla lying. So, I had all of my personal property seized out of my driveway, and had my desk drawers, and I had to, in the course of about 3 years, defend that property and finally get it back. And this fella was the clerk in the law library. He helped me immensely. And one evening, we were out in the yard. It was about 9 o'clock. I had a phone call scheduled for about 10 after 9. And he came up and said, "Hey, you want to smoke a joint?" And my normal reaction to that question was, "No, I'm in jail." But in this particular situation, I said, "Well, sure." So we went out in the yard and we laid down on the grass and we smoked some grass and we were contemplating the stars above. And he says, "You're from Laguna Beach, right?" And I said, "Yeah." And he says, "You must know Fareed." Now, there's a name that Paul probably remembers.
Fareed?
That's a pseudonym for anybody who's going to try to Google this guy. That's
forget it.
We all know who it is.
Okay.
But, Fareed. And I said, I do know Kareeb. And he said, "Then you must know Paul Hartmann." And I said, "Not only do I know Paul Hartmann, exactly 10 minutes, I am calling Paul Hartmann."
Right. And that was a vast friendship. Yeah.
Nelson Merrill.
So you got out of you were released at different times from incarceration at different points in time?
Yes, we were decades apart in that sense. I didn't.
All three of us.
Yeah. Well, Nelson went back another time, didn't he?
He did, and I just recently ran into him at the Emerald.
You ran into him somewhere.
At the Emerald Cup. Wow.
At the
Nelson
Emerald Cup.
was I have another very good friend who I actually met Nelson through a guy named Nels Fredrickson in Santa Barbara, who was one of the people who coached me through my cancer thing. He had another true cannabis connoisseur, and Nelson was a friend of his, and Nelson grew, the favorite thing that he grew was SK1, which is a three-way hybrid of a Colombian, a Mexican strain, and an indica. That
sounds powerful.
Well, not powerful so much as only had a 12 to 15% THC in it, but the Colombian mixture in it gave it this flavor signature that was just crazy. And you could smoke it all day long, and the taste was just incredible, right? And it became
oranges.
Yeah, it had this chunky orange fruit to it and a flavor which was reminiscent of the same kind of thing that happened with Thai when it got cured. And I would just drool to get this guy's SK1. I would go and buy it from this guy for stash.
Yeah.
Right? And then I started growing it, and Scott used to call me up, and at the end of the season, and in 1 year he calls me up and he goes, He goes, "Is the desert spice ready?" And I'm like, "I don't know what you're talking about, Scott." And he's going, "He who controls the spice controls the universe." And I'm like, "What?" And he goes, "Is the desert spice ready?" I'm like, "Okay." And then I realized he was talking about the SK1.
Right.
Because I could grow it to a level of maturity down there and 12% humidity that you couldn't in Northern California, right? So
it's too cool up there.
It turned out just insane. And Scott would actually get it to have as his own stash up in Mendocino. It's like taking, what is it? You're taking Muslims to Mecca or something, right?
Now we steer the conversation
Smuggling
to hashish.
sand to the beach.
Yeah. Okay, so let me ask you about growing. Okay, I'm gonna put some growing questions to you, and I'll say that a few years ago, when I was just coming out of my horror of all of 2013, and then turning around, getting better from 13 into 14, I came across this concept of a grow box, and there are various different grow boxes available that claim to take a lot of the guesswork out of growing these pre-assembled grow boxes. You have to, of course, start with a good seed, obviously, and it's a lot easier to do that. What's your opinion on grow boxes, and specifically when they're small cabinets such as this? The recommendation is to take an auto-flowering plant. So tell us a little bit about what you think about that, and what auto-flowering is compared to, I guess, normal flowering, and what your thoughts are on the viability and quality of these items.
So auto-flowering plants, we start with that one. Those have been bred specifically to produce female plants. If you force a female plant to produce a male flower by altering the night cycle, in other words, introducing light during the night cycle periodically throughout the night cycle, the plant will, it stresses the plant out enough to cause it to express male flowers. Now, the difference between a female flower and a male flower that's been produced using that stress technique is that male flower is not a gene that will produce another male flower. So those seeds will come out about 99% female. When you take those plants and you put those into a situation like 12-12 normally, 12 hours of light or 12 hours of darkness, they'll flower instantly. If you put them in a situation where they're getting, say, 18 hours of light and 6 hours of dark, they'll still flower. Now, most cannabis will only flower if you reduce the light cycle down to 12 hours as a stress response. So just imagine a plant growing in nature. How does it know when the season is coming to a close? In equatorial climates, it doesn't know, so it has to be genetically predisposed to produce flowers. Wow. So the stress response is an age, but it's built in by age. When you start moving away from the equator, and you start getting into situations where there is a day-night cycle that changes through the season, those plants are going to depend on the night cycle to trigger the flowering. So the longer the night cycle, the oncoming of the flower. So you can genetically trick a strain to produce all female and to flower under 12 hours. In a grow box, that's almost critical, because you don't have a whole lot of space, and you don't want to get into that diminishing return. You don't want a 6-foot plant in a 5-foot grow box, now do you?
No.
So you really want to work with strains that are going to flower automatically and are going to flower when they're very, very small.
That's incredible. So it's not just about the seed. There's so much more going on. Wow. I was not led to believe that by these folks that wanted to sell me a cabinet, but yeah, I can understand that's going to get all over the map. Yeah. So let's. Do you have any recommendations for someone to use a grow cabinet, or you're just like a forest kind of guy? You just want it to grow as large as you can. Do you think that's a wise way to start? And I mean, it's kind of expensive to get one, so I wouldn't want to recommend it if it's ultimately not a good deal.
Well, if you've got a small space and you're working, like if you want to try to grow a few medicinal plants in your apartment, and you've only got a small space to work in, and you don't necessarily want to put a grow light in the middle of your living room, and you don't want to convert your bedroom into a grow house, it actually makes some sense, that is actually a really, I think it's a good alternative. When you start to move into places like where I live, like last year, we grew 10,000 square feet of canopy. A grow box wouldn't have been very helpful to us.
Right.
But if you're going to do like very specific genetic work, when you don't want other genes to get involved, you set up a grow box with a good filter, and male pollen can't get in there. And then you can be very specific about what males you use on the females that you've got locked in your box, or you can put your males in there and keep them away from your females, kind of like Catholic school, or some of these other places where all girls schools or all boys schools. You can set that up in a grow box, but you can't do that in nature. That's very difficult.
Okay, so how do we get started? Where would you recommend getting a seed or seeds, and how many? Like, this is a small time operation. Let's say in Canada, for example. Whatever the laws are, it's just a dog's breakfast of ridiculous nonsense so far, and there'll be all kinds of tinkering and subsequent lawsuits later, unfortunately. But what would you tell the person who wants to grow their legally allotted 4 plants, medical growers and perhaps, I don't know if it's personal use kind of folks or not. It disappoints me, the whole legislation, and right now it slipped my mind. But for the medical grower that's legally allowed to plant 4 plants only, according to the law, and they want to try that and be according to the law, what would you recommend to do in your home? I mean, not everybody has access to a Southern California, the equivalent of a vineyard, to grow their cannabis. So how would you start off in that place? There's going to be thousands of people that are in this position.
If you can't get a cutting, a clone, call it, but it's not really a clone. It's an asexual reproduction of another plant. So it's a cutting off of another plant. If you can't get one of those that already has a stabilized genetics and a known outcome, it's going to take a little bit of work. You're going to want to get seeds from a reputable seed supplier. The bag of weed that you just bought, probably not a good place to start. But some of the best strains in the world have been found in a bag. So, it's for the novice, if you don't want to spend a whole lot of time, what they call hunting through your genetics, the best thing to do is to try to find an already living cutting. Otherwise, the next step is to sprout your seeds, to determine which ones are males, remove the males, grow the females out, and then determine which one of those females is the one.
Gosh.
If you like it, then you can go back, get more seeds, and start the hunt again. And this is the unfortunate thing with a 4-plant limit, is that it's a really difficult thing to do, to strain hunt with 4 plants.
Yeah.
Just,
now, I could grow my 4 plants. I could put my 4 seeds in there, and it turns out after the germination process, and I identify all of them as male, perhaps, and I got to start over again, right?
That's true.
Oh,
that is absolutely true. I mean, I know somebody who's working on a stabilization project for an Afghan landrace strain.
Oh, boy.
They sprouted 18,000 seeds to get the one cutting.
Wow. Yeah, so that's why people want to be able to access medical cannabis, because you're not going to just plant 4 plants. You're literally a greenhorn yourself as a grower, and you're going to get 4 plants going. They're all going to be fantastic. It's not going to happen.
Yeah, I mean...
and it may. It may. But I wouldn't want to discourage anybody from trying because, going back to what Paul said about the wisdom that the plant can impart just by kind of an osmotic absorption of wisdom. That plant is a very smart plant. That plant has been around and around. It's been around for thousands of years, and it's grown side by side with humanity. As a matter of fact, I don't think we would be here today, for sure not having this conversation, if it weren't for the plant.
Oh, I wouldn't be, that's for sure. I don't think Paul...
No kidding, eh?
Yeah.
We definitely wouldn't.
See what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So, the last thing I want to do is discourage people from taking the journey.
Oh, me too. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying...
a medical condition.
I'm just giving you the heads up,
if
folks.
If you've got a medical condition and you're... Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I'm just saying I don't want to. If I gave the impression I don't think you should do it or I don't want you to do it, I'm making sure that I'm changing that perception right now. I'm just saying it may not be as easy, particularly for folks that don't know, like myself. You go get a plant, 4 pots, away you go, and it's all good. It's not necessarily going to go like that, but that should not discourage you from cultivating and learning how.
Exactly. I mean, it's such a learning process, and you got to start somewhere. It's one foot in front of the other. I mean, I'm always amazed at what people perceive in different stages. It's like learning how to water properly is always such a hard thing for some people to learn.
Too much, not enough.
Too much, not enough. And the guys who are too little don't see any results. And sometimes the people who put too much on see results, right? But, these hybrids are also sensitive to funguses that... and we're living in a sea of F1 hybrids and F2 hybrids that people have created with fungus sensitivities. So it's...
On that note about the plants being intelligent and being around for such a long time, as you say, and that cannabis has been working and growing side by side humanity for as long as we've been here, and probably longer. Are you familiar at all with the man named Cleve Baxter?
I'm not.
You're not? Okay, well, let me lay this on you. I read this book a long time ago, well before I made the connection of cannabis, etc. But this gentleman was, he fancied himself able to tell when people were lying. And he started to get into hypno and narco interrogation practices to be able to tell if people were lying. And he would administer polygraph tests, etc. And he was... teaching the cops in New York City and FBI agents how to be able to use the techniques that he was developing. And he became a bit of a law enforcement legend. And as it's written up in New York Times Magazine, he's got a book out called The Secret Life of Plants. This book is approximately 50 years old. And what he was able to do eventually is that he noticed that when he would threaten a plant with either cutting it apart or burning it, that the plant he had hooked up to a machine that he had devised or parts and bits of another machine. And he could threaten the plant, and the plant would register signals as you would if you were telling a lie on a lie detector test. And when things were going well and he was complimentary and caring for the plants would emit a positive signal as determined by his machinery. And he got into some crazy experiments, like he'd have a bunch of plants in a room, different kinds of plants, and he would be really mean and rude and threatening to some of the plants and very loving and caring of the other plants. And sure enough, the ones that were being mistreated deliberately for the purposes of the experiment would fall off. They wouldn't grow as well. They would develop diseases. The other ones were flourishing. And then you get this whole thing about old ladies talking to plants and how nuts are they. Which was also a misnomer because apparently it's quite effective. And the further back you go into the pure plants, such as your Colombian golds, etc., it fascinates me that, while you're growing, don't take that notion of caring for and loving. You are caring. You are a caretaker at that point. And I recommend this book to anybody. It doesn't get specifically into cannabis because of the times it was written, etc. But this guy can also attests, let me just take one more minute on this, that while he was sending messages, he said, to plants, such as he could be on the other side of the world. He could be in England, and his plants could have been somewhere in the United States of America. And as soon as he would think, I know this is nuts, folks, but I mean, this is what the data shows, and this is the kind of thing they don't teach in the mainstream. But as soon as he would think, something like, fuck you, plant, as soon as I get back, I'm going to kill you. He had it hooked up to machines, and he would get that fluctuation instantly from 7, 8, 10, 15 hours away on the different side of the planet, because it's not about, a lot like a tin can and a string or this kind of technology where you have these gaps. The plant would just sense that right away. And he continued to do this till he got to the point where he had all kinds of techniques and methodologies to bring this to light. And it's so sad to have read this book about for myself 25 years ago, and there's very little development on this awareness. These are sentient beings, and as I say, as a banner on my show, a plant can save your life. So worth checking out, The Secret Life of Plants.
Well, it goes back to the physics
You can't
thing.
fool Mother Nature.
Yeah, it's amazing. What's that, Paul?
It goes back to the physics thing where there is no empty space, right?
Right.
So when you make that expression, it's felt because the connection between that person and the plant isn't broken.
That's it.
It's just distance. There's atoms between you and them making that connection. This is an empty space, right?
Or so it seems.
It's solid space.
Yeah. And Masaru Emoto with this same kinds of studies on water, like telling a glass of water to go fuck itself, and I'm gonna pour you onto some paint and mix you up into some shit, and then it changes its molecular structure, and they look at it under a magnifying glass, and if you abuse a glass of water, and then you measure this under a microscope, take a look at it under a microscope, it looks all damaged and burnt, like the kind of snow that melts when the all the dirt falls down on it and everything. And then if you praise it and thank it and express gratitude and kindness and consideration, it looks like a beautiful snowflake. It's incredible.
It's frequency.
Yeah.
Right. You're using frequency. An expression of love is an energy vibration.
Right.
Is an energy vibration that is transcendable. You can send it, right? Like when you tell somebody over the phone you love them and they feel it, it's because they actually are feeling it. It's not.
Yeah. That's incredible. So take that into account, everybody that's growing, while you're getting into the science of it as well. I don't know if you're still there.
Yeah, there's
there we go.
There's an old saying, and that's the best fertilizer is the gardener's shadow.
Huh.
In other words, the more time you spend, the better outcome you'll have, and the more open you are to the messages the plant's going to send you, the better chance you have of receiving those messages and either acting appropriately or knowing when the right time to not act is. Don't jerk the wheel. What you guys were talking about, I think, is very interesting, that empty space. I heard the philosophy that we all have a brain, and the brain is our individual kind of analysis tool, but the mind lives between us. The mind is when our two brains are communicating, and that's kind of that empty space. And I don't think that has. There's no time in that space. That space is not affected by time. It's a collapsed time-space continuum, and so a plant knows without having to know your intent, without you having to express it.
Right. There were trees near where I was living for a long time, and one year I would walk by them, and they were perched on the edge of Lake Ontario. And one year I walked, it was probably 2010 or something, and maple trees, which I'm quite familiar with as a Canadian, and these things had these black warts, all like fully coming off of the leaf, like the size of almost a half, like a, what would it be like? The size of an entire ant, a large ant, or maybe even larger than that, just festered all over these trees. And I remember being so upset by this because I didn't know what it was. And it's these lovely trees, and you could tell they were going to come down, and not much I could do about that, right? They were just growing in the sort of municipal park area. And then the next year, all that stuff was gone. There must have been 20, 30 of these trees had this awful stuff on their leaves. And then I guess one cycle of dropping them brown on the ground and reflowering, they were fine again. And there was nobody out there doing any kind of maintenance. They're just natural trees out there. And I liked that turned around. It seemed like to me they were all going to rot and fall into the lake, but they seemed to be fantastic after that, and they still are.
It's constant evolution out there, I mean, the plants go through cyclic things all the time. we look at these long-term weather patterns that we're in, and who's to say that this didn't happen 10 million years ago, the same kind of cycle we're in now.
Oh, you mean the temperature warming, global warming, all that stuff?
Global warming, yeah.
Because we're only looking at it on a couple thousand years.
That's right. We're a blink, right? We're 80 years in the scheme of 10 million,
But all science says that it's all mankind doing this. That's what they say. The science is in, and we know that's what it is. And I guess there's a possibility that's not necessarily also the case, huh? So,
well, the absolutism is not. I don't think that there's an absolute there, but I do believe that human. We're currently producing a heck of a lot of carbon for our normal behavior that's going all the way up into the absolutely correct. That correction may be very painful for humanity, but it'll correct.
Right.
And when it does, we'll all be unfortunately in the ground. I'm assuming, but or somewhere in between. I did an energy study with a Nobel laureate, Dr. Evan Mills, and we looked at when we talk about these grow tents and these these indoor grow operations, and we looked at what the potential sustainability might be of everybody growing their cannabis indoors, because a lot of the legislation forces people to have to grow indoors.
Absolutely.
I know up in Canada that's a big problem for them. And when we looked at that, we looked at the amount of cannabis that is normally consumed, and we looked at medical versus adult use and everything in between, we came to the conclusion that if everybody had to grow all of their cannabis indoors, we would be in some serious environmental trouble. Whether we're responsible for 100% of it or not, we would certainly be contributing negatively to the carbon load that it needs to get scrubbed out by plants. And that's exactly what plants are doing right now, is they're scrubbing all of that carbon out of the atmosphere, and through its own biomass, its own system of decomposition, it puts the carbon where it belongs, back in the soil, reabsorbed by plants. But when it's floating around up in the atmosphere, not so good. And the average, now we're going to talk about an average, the average pound of indoor grown cannabis costs 4,200 pounds of carbon that goes up into the atmosphere.
Wow.
That's not a sustainable model. So 4,200.
Give me those numbers again.
If anybody wants to look, it's 4,200 pounds of carbon are produced for 1 pound of indoor grown cannabis.
And that is approximately one plant, is it not? One full-grown plant is about a pound once you dry it out?
On an indoor, grow, you're probably going to get maybe 4 to 8 ounces off of an indoor grown plant. Now, that's a plant that's probably going to take up about 10 square feet, about 5 feet by 5 feet.
Okay, so along with the military structure and the financial structure, you're also saying that proliferate indoor growing is going to be unsustainable, and we Canadians are going to be causing a lot of that up here.
Well, I mean, that's what I said in the beginning, was that you got these huge mega grows that are all based on Harper's version of the law, it all having to be indoors, and it's not a sustainable practice.
Wow.
So you've got these companies have gone public and taken in millions, tens of millions, some of them hundreds of millions of dollars.
Right.
And when the market crashes up here, like it did in California, we're going to see some of these big guys go under.
Yikes.
Happening right now.
It's happening right now in California. Tell us about give us a bird's eye view of what's going on. I read this very same thing that Paul was talking about is already going on in California. A lot of grow ops. Now, we just turned legal down there, right? January 1 was a different series of law structures for you in California, but now you would think everyone's flourishing, but they're down there going through a lot of troubles. Can you tell us about that?
I can. Well, California, when we did our energy study, we were able to access quite a bit of data. My partner in the study, who was working at Lawrence Berkeley National Labs at the time, so we had access to massive amounts of data. And what he came up with was that, California is a producer state. we have 300 days of the year of sunshine.
Yeah, rub it in.
So we produce most of the food for the United States. We produce massive amounts of textiles. We're a producer state. We're the sixth largest economy in the world. California in 2011, when we did our energy study, was producing about 60, maybe 65% of all the cannabis consumed in the United States.
Wow.
It's all coming out of California. And then possibly quite a bit that was, in Canada and other places too. But what happened was, as each state, Colorado, Washington, Oregon, Illinois, Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, if each state comes online with their own policy of acceptable self-growing, it reduces the market share that California had. Come Prop 64, which was 1/1/2018, we voted on it in 2017, and it was enacted in 2018, which allowed adults or adult-like people who have had enough birthdays, to grow their own cannabis for whatever reason. And that further reduced the consumption of cannabis. You'd think that it wouldn't, but it actually did. Fewer people are actually smoking cannabis now than were 15 or 20 years ago.
Right.
Scratch your head on that one for a moment.
Yeah.
So now all of a sudden California is the producer state. It has fewer consumers in California, and it's got fewer consumers across the board, which is illegal anyway. We produced in 2017 an estimated 2-year supply of cannabis. So if you know what that does, as Paul said early in the conversation, that cannabis is going to become a commodity. Well, cannabis is very rapidly becoming a commodity. So last year at this time, the price of the street price of cannabis hasn't changed much, but the wholesale price of cannabis in California went from about $1,800 a pound for very high quality outdoor grown cannabis. Right now it's sitting at about $380 a pound.
Wow. $380 a pound.
God, I miss California.
Here's a guy that knows what he's talking about, Scott Zeramby from Mendocino Agricultural Products and Dirt Cheap Landscape and Garden Supply. Why is it so dirt cheap? What are you doing?
Well, may not necessarily be the best economic model. I think scarcity actually is where you get your best dollar. But the absence of going back to why people grow and how people grow and what the benefits are. I think that from a medical model, we've really kind of twisted up what disease is and what health is.
Absolutely.
And we think that medicine is the treatment of a disease. And I think medicine is the prevention of a disease. The consumers of cannabis have naturally been more healthy than the non-consumers.
Yeah.
Well, wasn't that magic? That really puts a little hitch in the pharmaceutical companies' get along. They don't like that.
Yeah.
They would rather see a disease to treat. They've got drugs for all these things. They got a pill for that. They got a pill for your fear of having a pill for that. So they don't want to see you take control of your absence of disease, your presence of health.
Yeah.
And that's a real challenging situation for all of us. So when they call it an adult use, I think all cannabis consumption is medical.
I agree. I totally agree. And if you do it recreationally enough, you're buffering yourself to the point where you might not need medical intervention. Well, listen, we're coming up near to the end of our time, unfortunately. I want to ask you a specific question. It turns out that our previous guest on the show, Barry Foy, one of the gentlemen smugglers, these guys were on the East Coast while you guys were on the West Coast. In the 70s and 80s and even the early 90s, we're bringing in cannabis from... just at the beginning, a very few places, and before all of this genetic proliferation, they were having Acapulco gold, Colombian gold, and Panama red. So Can we talk about though? Is that almost a land race, the Colombian strain and the and also the Acapulco Gold? What's the difference between Acapulco Gold and Colombian?
Everything was land race back then.
Yeah, sure. So
those
what was
were
so great about it? I enjoyed having it, and I had some last year.
Well,
and I couldn't believe how much I enjoyed that.
They were strong foundation strains that, the genetic heritage of those varieties went back hundreds, maybe longer years. They were just good, hardy strains that were locally produced. In Panama Red, remember, Panama was Colombia before it became Panama.
Right.
They kind of stole the country and the canal from Colombia, right?
Wow.
So those strains came from there, and the Mexican strains were closely related, but could have more African genes in them. We're not sure how they got to the New World or if they originated there.
Right.
Our knowledge of those strains and their foundation nature is different. We don't look at how when Cortez came to the New World and Pizarro and Marco Polo and those guys took seeds from the New World. They took them to Asia and Europe and India. Tomatoes and hot peppers didn't exist in those places until after the Spanish had come to the New World. Same with potatoes, right? So what cannabises came from China to here and vice versa, India, things like that, we've kind of lost in the cloud,
That's too bad. I don't seem to be able to find Colombian Gold. Like I said, I had a bit at a dispensary last year. They were selling some. It was there for a short period of time, and then it wasn't there anymore.
SK1's the closest thing you can get to it probably anymore. That's
SK1.
Pure. Although I'm betting strain hunters, those guys probably have some stashed away or something.
Oh, I'll bet, those guys.
I would look at Arjan. Those guys at Greenhouse Seeds are really pioneering, going back to these original land races and trying to unlock the secrets in that genetics and how those were, able to survive in so many millennia, in their own nature.
The Acapulco Gold is here one of the best strains in the world, and so old. I mean, if you remember Cheech and Chong albums, Acapulco Gold, man.
But that's regional names, right?
Sure.
That strain, who knows where it came from? It was just grown in Acapulco, and
so you can never really get locked in on a fantastic seed that you want to cultivate and grow yourself. I mean, how do you? Because we got to wrap it up soon. So how can you best tell the folks who don't know anything, including myself, what are the top 3-5 things I need to do to get started right now to try and get this going? Both of you guys.
Boy, it's so hard.
Well,
There's so many different strains now,
Yeah.
But you look for something that finishes early up here for sure in Canada and is mold resistant. And similarly, so for West Coast people in Mendocino have to deal with a mold issue too.
Right.
Scotty, what do you guys grow out there?
Right now, we're looking at a lot of the sativas. We've got a great the Mendocino pineapple, and it produces a flower that is just extraordinary. The smell of it doesn't even smell like what you would think cannabis smells like. It doesn't have any of that fury, skunky. It's just pure sweet fruit. And it's coming in at about 21% THC. So it's a very high THC strain. It's an equatorial sativa, so very long leaves, and it resists mold. So think about fat leaves have more surface area to collect condensation, which leads to mold. Thin leaves, so looking at sativas, early finishing sativas is what I would recommend folks look at, particularly for their first grows. They tend to grow a little bigger. You get a little higher yield. They might be a little lower in the THC, but they're easier to grow.
Okay, and it's always important, and this is tough in Canada. Not only the heat, but the light. You can't just grow them in a box all the time and not have the lights on. What can you tell us about light deprivation? That's a specific question coming in from one of the listeners.
Well, light dep is really manipulating the day-night cycle in an area that doesn't have. So, light deprivation is simply cutting off the light early. So if you can cause your plants to flower multiple, not the same plant, but you can have multiple crops in the same year by, even if you have 18 hours of outdoor sunshine, you just pull a tarp over your greenhouse so you can block out 100%. If you introduce light during the dark cycle, so if there's a little stab of light coming in, that flower alone is probably going to produce a male flower that will produce seeds, which is not really ideal.
Yeah, of course.
Particularly if you've only got a small amount of space. So light deprivation is just some system of shutting off the light at 12 hours.
Okay. And then you can further manipulate and control by then. I'm going to manipulate you, Scott, and say goodbye to you. We'll have you back on sometime, and hopefully you'll have something we can do a little bit more advanced than a Gilligan Island coconut phone or whatever we're doing here. It's been a bit rough, but the first front end of it was a little bit difficult. So it's great Paul was here to kind of sub in and pick up. But you've been sounding great for the last hour or so. So thanks very much for your time, and I'll make sure Paul gets home safely.
Thanks a lot, Scotty.
And it was great talking to you.
Much love to you up there in Canada land. Peace.
Love you, brother.
All right, stay green and stay lean. We'll talk to you later. That's Scott Zeramby, and he is from the Mendocino. Growing situation down there's a little theme song for you, Sting, to get out of there. So now we do have one more question I want to get to before we say goodbye.
A closing question.
A closing question, as it is. Okay, so Paul, we started talking about this particular strain a while ago with the gentleman smugglers there, and I would just like to understand that you went to Colombia. Mm-hmm. Is that right? Colombia.
Yes.
And you showed them. You showed them how to grow better. What was that all about? How did that go?
I had gone to Colombia just to get seeds, and to Cartagena, and I had a rather bad experience, though, as soon as I got there. I traveled as a photographer, a fashion and travel photographer, wherever I went. And so I always had camera equipment with me. And so I get to Bogota, and I had to lay over there for a day, and then I was going to Cartagena. And I walk out of the airport, and I set my camera case right down next to my leg, and the next thing I know, it's running down the street.
Oh, no.
And I had about $50,000 worth of Leica camera equipment in the case, and I went running after this kid, and he dropped it before I got near him, but I almost got arrested. Like, I had to buy my way out of a situation with the police.
Really?
Yeah.
You had to buy your way out.
Buy my way out to get my camera case back, and then I went to Cartagena the next day and went out into the mountains and looked at some landrace strains of Colombian that these guys were growing, and collected seed, and brought it back with me to Mexico and grew it there.
Wow, that's amazing. And then so they took your advice. You learned a couple of things too. I'm sure you must.
It was at that stage where people still were making the transition to sensimilla, to seedless cannabis, right? So it was just quick stuff like that. Their strain, the great thing about the Colombian variety was that it was so resistant to just about every problem you could have in a tropical environment.
Right.
And everything in the tropics wants to eat everything else. So it's there's so much biodiversity and life in a spot like that I mean, plants get beat up by bugs.
Wow.
So you got to have something that's resistant.
That's not so great.
Yeah.
Plants beat up by bugs.
Yeah.
Well, that's not a good thing. We're going to have to get going. We are definitely out of time, but I just want to give a plug to Cannabis Daily cannabisdaily.co. Been some great people down there helping us out. And check out cannabisdaily.co online. It's cannabis with a Z for our Americans and our Z for our more British-based colonials. They've got a fantastic thing out now. It's a free ebook. You didn't want to hear that. It's a free ebook called The Lesser-Known Benefits of Cannabis. And you can download that right now. It's a lot of cool things. There's about 5 pages there. It says it makes prescription drugs cheaper because you're going to be using less of them. It's much more effective than a lot of medicines for a lot of different things because it doesn't really attack the disease. It renders you... what the hell is that noise? It renders you impervious to disease. So that's why it works on so many different things. It's a nice-looking form here. It can help improve your lung capacity. I know this is counterintuitive to a lot of the mainstream folks, and it also helps lessen alcohol consumption. And maybe if you weren't so rippled and pickled in the head, you wouldn't be dreaming up Canada's new legalized cannabis legislation, would you, Bill? It can also heat things up in the bedroom. So that's a cool thing to do if you've ever... partaken of it. So check that out at cannabisdaily.co. And did you want to say anything or make a plug or anything? Let's plug Sam's book.
We got to plug Sam's book for sure. Yeah. Dr. Sam's book, The Great Cannabis Conspiracy. If you haven't bought it, get it. It's all going to a good cause, to a great man. We wouldn't be where we are today if it wasn't for guys like Sam Malachi. Putting his money where his mouth is for decades here in Canada.
Yeah, The Great Cannabis Conspiracy. Definitely check that out. It's a great book, and it'll teach you a lot of things. And for me, it confirmed a lot of things that I thought were nutty ideas that I had that I didn't really feel comfortable articulating, and he's all laid it all out there for us.
Yes, you can feel a bit insane at times, and then you realize, have I just been a sucker all these years, or what?
Yeah, been fooled by the man. So yeah, before we go, let's get this thing out of here. I don't know what's going on.
You know what else we got to do is we got to show our solidarity to our brothers and sisters in Australia. Jenny Hallam and Tony Bauer, and who was the other gentleman who was making stuff for his daughters, and they're after him down there too.
Yeah. Criminals, they're branded.
Yeah, branded criminals. These people need our love and support all around the world. There are cannabis activists that are being persecuted. And we stand solid with our Australian brothers and sisters for sure. Absolutely.
So we're there with you, and we'll do our best to try to spread the word. Congratulations again to Vera Toomey. Check her out. She's on the Green Crush page, just pouring her heart out in gratitude to so many people that got behind her efforts, and she is a true champion as well.
Yeah,
and
Jane Drow, that was a great one.
Yeah, she was on last week. Same thing. Oh, you've got multiple sclerosis, do you? Well, you really want to check cannabis out as a regular life improvement agent.
Indeed.
And maybe get into a whole different life you hadn't even believed would be possible. So on behalf of Paul Hartmann, and he can also say goodbye his own self. I just want to say thank you for everybody coming on, and I hope to see you again on the show next week. Ooh.
Awesome. Good night, Alan.
This is Green Crush Conspiracy Queries with Alan Park, and we're not going to stop until everybody gets to understand how great this substance really is. Signing off.
Be a part of the Green Crush.